Hello, hello! Welcome back to Brenda's Books. Today we will be continuing with Blemished Beauty on Chapter 16, Familiar Strangers. Here we go. "We've got to get you to a doctor, Daphne," urged Tom. "I can't bear to see you like this anymore." Daphne lay on her back on the couch with her head propped up on the couch's arm. "I'll be fine," she whimpered. "You can hardly breathe. That's not fine," Tom countered, as he came to kneel beside her, taking her hand. Daphne weakly squeezed his hand in return. "You said the roads would be clear on Friday. I can make it until then." "I said it would be safest to go then, but we could probably leave today and be okay. You're not going to get better here, and I can't do anything to help you." Daphne took a shallow breath. "I had the time of my life on that snowmobile of yours. Now the thought of getting on one makes me hurt even more." Tom sighed and bowed his head into her hands. "I can't believe I did this to you," he groaned. "I cannot tell you how sorry I am." "Would you stop apologizing for saving my life?" Daphne chastised weakly. Tom lifted his head. "I just wish I could have done it without hurting you." "Well, living hurts sometimes," Daphne claimed matter-of-factly. "You got that right," Tom muttered, standing up. "I'm going to go pack your things." "I'm sorry I can't help you." Tom rubbed a finger under her chin. "I know, sweetheart." Daphne half smiled. It was awful being an invalid and having to watch Tom lug everything out of the cabin alone. She sat up enough so she could peer out at him through the glass window and watch him carefully pack the large trunk of the snowmobile. She was beyond disappointed her last couple of days together had to be spent with her moving around as if she were 90 years old. Poor Tom had to do everything for her. He did it willingly and without a single sign of annoyance or impatience. Daphne admitted to herself he would be a very good companion. Tom would certainly be easy to love. Love. If Daphne had any idea what that was, she thought it might be something similar to Tom. No matter what he said or how he used to be, Daphne was absolutely positive Tom had turned out to be the most unselfish person she would ever meet. The next hour was a blur, but soon enough Daphne was sitting on a snowmobile, absolutely dreading the physical pain that was sure to come from this ride. "You sit in the front," Tom insisted as he scooted in behind her. "You'll get bounced around less up there." Daphne nodded. Tom had long arms, so it was no problem for him to reach the throttle from behind her. "Just let me know if I need to slow down, okay? No hurry." "Okay," agreed Daphne as Tom revved the engine. The ride was certainly the smoothest ride she had ever been on with Tom. She was very aware of his effort to avoid jumps and bumps and sharp turns. It still didn't stop Daphne from being completely without breath, though, as the constant vibration of the snowmobile jolted her sore and broken body. Her tears froze to her cheeks underneath her face mask as they moved farther and farther out of the mountains. Even though Tom only stopped twice to give Daphne a break from the ride, it still took a good 4 hours to arrive at a main highway. Fortunately, the nearest hospital was only 2 miles south, and Tom promptly took the shortest route. "How are you?" Tom asked when he leaped off his parked snowmobile. Daphne just moaned softly. Tom kissed her nose through her face mask and gently gave her a loose hug. "You made it. We're here." Tom gently helped her stand up. "Would it hurt less if I carried you?" he asked. Daphne shook her head emphatically. As they entered the building, Tom didn't hesitate to ask for a wheelchair. Before long, he was pushing her behind a nurse. The hospital was pretty ordinary looking except for the thick, narrow red carpet that ran down the middle of the hallway. Daphne's vision went blurry as she watched it roll beneath her, so she leaned her head back and closed her eyes. "Hey, Tom!" someone called. Daphne opened her eyes to see who had spoken, but the person was behind her. Tom stopped pushing her chair. "Oh, hey, Mike. How are you? Long time no see." "Yeah, I'll say," Mike agreed. "Hey, sorry to hear about your dad. I'm sorry I didn't make it to the funeral." "Oh, it's okay, man. It's fine." "So you have an injured friend?" Mike questioned as he walked around to the front of Daphne's chair. He was kind of a big man, tall and a little bit wide. Even though Daphne had put on makeup this morning, she was glad she still had her face mask on. Certainly the snow and wind would have washed it all off. "This is Daphne," Tom introduced her. Daphne gave a slight wave. "Hi, Daphne," Mike said with a smile. "Are you okay?" "I'm perfect," Daphne said sarcastically. "I just like to come to hospitals for fun." Mike chuckled at that. "Are you ready, sir?" the nurse asked impatiently. "Oh, yes, I'm sorry." Tom began pushing the wheelchair again. Mike started walking alongside Tom, and Daphne heard him whisper, "Is she your new girlfriend?" Daphne felt Tom shrug behind her. Mike let out a low chuckle. "Good luck with that, man," he said, giving Tom a slug on the shoulder. "See you around." "See ya, Mac," said Tom. Daphne and Tom sat in a cold, stale clinic room, waiting to see the results of Daphne's x-rays. A little bit of a déjà vu for Daphne. She was sitting on the paper, spread across the hospital bed, dangling her feet over the edge. How glad she was to have some feeling back in her toes and nose. "I'm beginning to feel a little less numb," Tom announced. He was sitting on a chair at the foot of the hospital bed, looking up at her. Daphne grinned. "That's exactly what I was thinking." Tom smiled slowly. "Did your ribs ever get numb out in the cold?" Daphne shook her head. "Nope, they apparently are too stubborn for that." Tom gazed up at her sympathetically. "I'm so sorry." Daphne gave him a tired look. "What can I do to get you to quit saying that?" Tom sighed. "I don't know. I don't think I'll feel better until you do." Suddenly their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. "Tom, are you in there?" "Is that you, Mac?" Tom called. The door latch clicked open, and Daphne turned her head the opposite way and stared at a poster that explained symptoms of the flu. She didn't feel good enough to make friendly conversation. "What are you doing here?" Tom inquired. "I was just wondering if you and Daphne wanted to meet up with us after you're done here," said Mike. "Us?" Tom wondered. "Yeah, me and—" "Excuse me, sir, this is not your room," said a man. Daphne recognized it as Dr. Gray, who had spoken with them when they first came in. "Oh, Okay, said Mike. Daphne heard footsteps retreating down the hall. The doctor stepped in and closed the door. "Is that pain medication working yet?" asked Dr. Gray. Daphne turned to look at him. "Not yet. It won't be much longer." "Well," the doctor said, holding up some x-rays to the wall so the light hit them just right. "As you can see right here and here, you have 2 broken ribs." Tom exhaled sharply and shook his head. Daphne, however, was not surprised. Her body had been telling her this ever since the moment she spit out that dreadful piece of popcorn. "It looks like one break happened more recently than the other." Tom and Daphne looked at each other confused. "What kind of activity have you done since your Heimlich episode?" asked Dr. Gray. "Nothing but ride a snowmobile," answered Daphne. The doctor lifted his head as if discovering something new. "You probably broke the second one on the ride." "I tried to drive slowly and carefully," Tom said, baffled. "I'm sure you did," said the doctor. "But after one broken rib, it's easy to break another, if you do more than, well, nothing." Tom was getting paler by the moment. "There was no other way to get here," he said softly. Dr. Gray placed his hand on Tom's shoulder for a brief moment. "You did the right thing." He turned to face Daphne. "I am going to send you home with a spirometer. It measures your lung capacity so you can see the improvement as your ribs heal. It's important to take your medicine every 4 hours. Otherwise, it might be too painful to practice your deep breathing." Daphne nodded. "Thank you, doctor." "If you can get someone to drive you somewhere rather than ride a snowmobile, I would strongly recommend it," the doctor said. Tom pursed his lips and nodded. Tom was once again pushing Daphne in the wheelchair down the hall. "I'll get a hotel room for you tonight. Maybe I can find Mike to see if we can catch a ride with him." "I don't want to put anybody out, Tom, including you." Tom sighed. "You can't break another rib, Daphne." Daphne sighed too. "Hey, that breath didn't hurt," she said excitedly. That's good, but you still need to take it easy, said Tom, spinning her chair around slowly so it was facing him. He knelt in front of her. Is it okay if we meet up with Mac? Do you think he's waiting for us? Daphne questioned. Tom nodded. Knowing Mac, probably. Let's go look in the waiting room. I'm a mess, Tom. Nobody will care, Daphne. They understand you've been in the hospital. I know, I don't want to embarrass you in front of your friends. I don't... And then he stopped himself. He could hear his pa's voice in his mind. Think of what she needs. How about I get your bag, and then I'll look for Mac while you clean up a bit. Is that okay? Of course, Tom said, if that's what you want. I would really appreciate it. Tom smiled. Be right back. After Tom had retrieved Daphne's bag from the snowmobile and picked up Daphne's prescriptions, he made his way to the waiting room. Yep, there was Mike, just as he had expected. Once Mike got something into his head, he never stopped. Hey, Mac, greeted Tom, sitting on the large sofa-like chair across from him. Oh, hey, man! I'm glad you came looking for us. We were just about to leave. This is Brad, he said, pointing to his friend sitting on the couch next to him. Hey, what's up? Muttered Brad. Hey, Tom said with a brief wave. Looking at Mike and Brad side by side, Brad looked like a toothpick. Tom might even classify him as a surfer boy, what with his shaggy blonde hair barely out of his eyes. Where's your girl? Asked Mike. She's changing, Tom responded. Oh, so you do admit she's your girl now? Mike asked with a grin. Tom shook his head. She's I don't know. Mike and Brad both laughed together. He's still nervous about her. This'll be fun to see, laughed Brad. Tom sighed and leaned back in his chair, thrumming his fingers on either side of the armrests. So, is she different than Tanya? Mike asked. Definitely, Tom said without hesitation. How so? Mike cocked his head to the side, looking curious. Well, she's nice and she has a brain, answered Tom matter-of-factly. Mike and Brad both laughed out loud again. So what's her name? Daphne. Oh, really? Said Brad, leaning back and putting his ankle up on his knee. I dated a Daphne once. What's her last name? Zollinger, Tom answered. Brad's face froze in a look of surprise. No way, that's her! Mike let out a high cackle. Sweet! He exclaimed, rubbing his palms together quickly. This will be awesome watching the two of you squirm over her. Tom tilted his head back to look at the ceiling. And just when I thought things wouldn't be awkward. Don't worry about it, Tom, Brad said. It was a long time ago. How long ago? Tom wondered. Oh, we were 16, so 5 years ago, maybe? Brad said. Is she hot? Asked Mike. I only saw her with all of her snow stuff on. Oh, yeah, said Brad. She's... Shut up, Tom said abruptly, trying to sound nonchalant. I do not want to hear y'all talk about her. The guys laughed again, and Brad clapped his hands together. Oh, he's into her. Tom cleared his throat and decided to change the subject. Hey, Mike, I need a favor, he announced. Mike let out another burned-out laugh. Oh, yeah? Already? Tom smirked. I'm just kidding, Mike chuckled. I'm sure I owe you one anyway. What's up? Daphne and I need a ride to a Holiday Inn or something. Ooh, Mike and Brad exclaimed together and laughed some more. Tom rolled his eyes in his head all at once. He was so glad Daphne wasn't here for this. Not for that reason, you idiots. Then what reason would it be? Asked Mike with a laugh in his voice. The doctor told her not to ride on a snowmobile, and that's all I have. We won't be sleeping in the same room. Seriously? Mike asked. Daphne's a good girl, said Brad, moving just his eyes to look at Mike. Ah, said Mike. He turned to Tom. Are you that good? He asked with a teasing look on his face. Shut up, Tom muttered again. Now can you give us a ride or not? I already said yes, man. Do you need a ride to Brocksville in the morning? Tom raised his eyebrows. Yeah, are y'all still going to be around? Mike and Brad looked at each other and nodded. Tom guessed that was all he wanted to know. Well, awesome. Thank you, said Tom. Mike nodded once. Sure, man. It would be good to catch up more. Well, actually, on the way to Brocksville, it might be just Daphne, Tom clarified. Mike furrowed his brow. Why? Where are you going? I need to get back to Little Pine. What for? Mike asked, still confused. I'm a hunter, Tom said flatly. You get paid to do that? Tom nodded but didn't feel like giving any more of an explanation. Okay, well, that's pretty sweet. Right on. Tom nodded. Thanks. I'm going to go look for Daphne now, he declared, standing up. I'm right here, said Daphne from behind him. Tom turned around to see Daphne walking slowly towards them. Hey, he cried, walking round his chair to meet her halfway. Why are you walking? I was just about to go get your wheelchair. Oh, I think I'm okay, but thank you, she said. Tom grabbed both her hands. She looked just a little pale, but she looked good. She was wearing that blue sparkly sweater again, with her hair bundled neatly on her head. Did Mike say it was okay to give us a ride? She whispered. Yes, Tom whispered back. Are you sure you're okay? She opened her mouth to speak, but Brad beat her to it. Hey, Daphne, he said in a low voice. He was now standing beside Tom. Brad? She exclaimed in surprise. That's me, Brad smiled, opening his arms wide. Daphne's eyes opened even wider as Brad stepped in to give her a hug. Whoa! Cried Tom, pushing back with one hand on Brad's chest. Brad shot him a confused and annoyed look. She has 2 broken ribs, Tom explained. Oh! Brad cried in surprise, looking at Tom and then Daphne. Well then, easy now, he said, taking a slow step toward Daphne and carefully wrapping his arms around her. Daphne returned the hug with the same weak gesture. It's great to see you again, Daphne said, pulling out of the hug. You too, Daphne, Brad grinned, showing all of his teeth. You too. Now Mike stood up from his seat. It's good to see you're feeling a little better now, Daphne, he said as he walked over to where they all were standing and reached out his hand. Daphne extended her own to give him a feeble handshake. I am, thank you. You look a lot different, though. Last time I saw you, you were like a little snowy puppy, Mike teased childishly. Daphne smiled, one of those glowing, brilliant smiles. Oh, no. Do I really have to suffer through another flirting session? Why would she do that to me now? Before Tom could complain to himself much longer, Daphne had taken his hand in hers, which pleased him tremendously. He noticed the other two both took a step back and put on polite smiles. Tom here has told us all about you, Mike claimed. Oh, he has he? Said Daphne, eyeing Tom with suspicion. Tom threw Mike a disparaging look, but said nothing. Mike just grinned in return. How did you break your ribs, Daphne? Asked Brad. Daphne continued to look right at Tom. I did it, Tom confessed. He glanced at the other two to see their shocked faces. Daphne also looked a little surprised. Brad was shaking his shaggy head. Why? Daphne was choking, so I gave her the Heimlich, Tom explained. But a little too hard, obviously. Ouch, Mike said, looking pained. Didn't all those sports toughen you up any, Daphne? Asked Brad with a teasing smile. Daphne smiled back a little shyly. I guess not. Well, let's all go get something to eat, shall we? Suggested Mike. Yes, but I have to pick up my prescriptions first, said Daphne. I already got them for you. I put them in your bag, Tom declared, as he lifted it up on his shoulder. Daphne hesitated slightly. But I need 2. Tom smiled knowingly. I got them both. Oh, thanks. I'll pay you back for them. Tom smiled and shook his head. It's on me, Daphne. Ah, see, cried Brad, slapping Tom on the back. Good old-fashioned chivalry. Now come on, lovebirds, let's go eat. Daphne was quiet through most of dinner. The guys were still talking about cars, which Daphne knew nothing about. She didn't mind, though, since she was starving and her glazed chicken was delicious. She almost felt normal again. The wrenching pain in her side had turned into a dull ache. She was finally warm, and her stomach was slowly getting full. Tom and Mike had started reminiscing quite loudly about some video game they used to play together in high school. Since Brad was temporarily left out of the conversation, he turned his attention to Daphne. He was sitting directly across from her, so it was easy to notice his boyish face. "So, Daphne, how do you like being with Tom?" Brad asked, looking very interested in what her answer would be. Daphne raised her eyebrows and finished chewing before she spoke. "I like it fine." "Yeah, he seems like a good guy." "Absolutely," Daphne agreed, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "He is a little protective of you." "How do you mean?" Daphne asked. Brad shrugged. "Well, like when he stopped me before I gave you a bear hug, and just some other things he said before you came into the waiting room." "Like what? What did he say?" Daphne inquired, a little too curious. Brad shrugged again. "Just protective things." Daphne furrowed her brow. "Well, that was specific." Brad grinned. "He seemed a little uncertain about your relationship, though. You're not playing him, are you?" he asked with a conniving look. "Ha ha," muttered Daphne, taking a sip of her ice water. Brad folded his arms on the table and leaned over, closer to Daphne. "It sounds like you two need to have a little DTR." Daphne rolled her eyes. "I hate that acronym," she said, taking another sip of water. "Have you not had one yet?" Brad asked, raising his eyebrows. "Had what?" asked Tom, suddenly joining in on the conversation. "I was just wondering why you and Daphne here," Brad commented, gesturing towards her, "haven't had a DTR yet." "What is a DTR?" asked Tom. Brad gave Daphne a feigned, surprised look. "Seriously, Daphne," he mocked, jabbing a finger at Tom with a wide grin. "What is a DTR?" Tom repeated. "Define the relationship," answered Mike, before taking a bite of his second burger. Tom lifted his head slowly in acknowledgement, and then he gave Daphne a curious look. "Did you—" Daphne knew what he wanted to ask. He wanted to know if she had told Brad about his marriage comment. "No," Daphne answered. Tom glanced back and forth between Daphne and Brad, as if their faces would tell him what they had been talking about. "Look," Brad said, "I just asked her why you were unsure about your relationship. She seemed to know. That's all." He shrugged and took another drink of his Coke. Tom stared at Daphne, his face full of questions. "Doesn't the girl always know what's going on and the guy never does?" asked Mike with his mouth full of something. "Isn't that how it always is?" "Yeah, probably," Brad agreed, grinning. "At least that's how it was when Daphne and I were together," he said with a wink. Daphne felt her cheeks burn as she scowled back at Brad. After that, there wasn't much but small talk among the group, until Tom asked for the check. "We can pay for our own, Tom," claimed Mike. "Nah, consider it reimbursement for your gas and time," said Tom as he slapped some cash on the table. Mike shrugged. "All right, then," he said. "Let's get you guys a room." Daphne saw Tom give Mike an evil glare. "I didn't mean that," Mike cried, feigning innocence. Tom said nothing else as he stood up and held Daphne's coat out to assist her in putting it on. "Thank you," said Daphne. She really was grateful. It was still hard to move. And that concludes Chapter 16. Thanks for listening. Next week will be Chapter 17, Secrets. And we are about a little more than halfway through Blemished Beauty. If you want to find out more about Brenda's books, you can visit brendasbooks.net. Until next time, take care.